Prepare yourselves. What you are about to witness is not fiction. It is the price of dignity, the price of freedom. What happens when a man looks at the fruit of your womb and says, "You are nothing but property to be negotiated"? I am Estelle. And this story, which begins with a handful of cold dirt in my hands and ends with an escape under the night sky of South Carolina, is my testimony of war. If you are listening to me, and if you have ever felt the weight of machismo, oppression, or any system that tries to reduce you to an object, I tell you, this fight is yours too. My life and the lives of my two daughters, Ruth and my little Celeste, were consumed by the poison of tyranny in the isolated plantations of Lowcountry, South Carolina. The beauty of the Lowcountry, with its Spanish moss and its mysterious swamps, hides a history of pain, of resilience, and of ancient systems that refuse to die. For our Black community, we have fought for centuries for our autonomy, and my marriage to Jerome was proof that this fight was not over. Jerome did not view marriage as a sacred union, he saw it as a contract of dominion. I was what he said I was. And my daughters, he considered them extensions of his power over the land. I know many of you understand this pain, the promised love that turns into violence and rejection, the abuse that is subtly imposed, and the loneliness of fighting against your own home. My youngest daughter, Celeste, was born sick, and Jerome's first act of cruelty was cold rejection. He refused to touch her, declaring, "I don't feed problems." That phrase, "I don't feed problems," was the key to my torment. Ruth and I fought against relentless poverty, with the smell of whiskey and fear hanging in the air, while he squandered the little we had. I spent sleepless nights, Celeste's forehead in my trembling hands, begging God, questioning the faith that my Grandma May had left me. But what destroyed me, and then rebuilt me, was his plan for Ruth. Jerome did not see Ruth's potential or innocence. He saw the chance for a real estate profit. He made an arranged marriage deal with the wealthy Sanders family, trading my daughter's soul for more land. He would look at me with that icy contempt and speak the phrase that tore my heart. "She is what I say she is." Right there, I knew. The price of our silence was the continuous enslavement of my lineage. I knew that if I stayed, Ruth would be buried alive in a soulless marriage. The point of no return, the climax of my pain, came on the night Celeste's fever fire went out. She was gone. I was alone. Jerome could only offer his coldness. At least that's one less mouth to feed. But in that deafening void, deep in my soul, the pain transformed into a sacred fury, and it was with this fury that I performed the hardest act of my life. I buried Celeste alone, with my bare hands. The cold dirt cut my nails, but it gave me strength. With every handful of soil I threw, I made a secret vow, an oath between me and the Lord. No other child of mine will be buried alive. That grave became my war altar, and the promise of Ruth's freedom, my only prayer. This vow was not just about running away. It was about breaking the generational curse that was trying to keep us in the darkness. It was about honoring the struggle of all the women who came before me, whose lives and children were traded for property. The escape was desperate. It was terrifying. The fear of Jerome waking up and dragging us back was real, but the promise I made to Celeste was stronger. We left under the darkness of the new moon, taking only Grandma May's Bible and the certainty that tyranny would not be our destiny. The question hanging in the air was, where would we go and who would believe us? The end of this story, which you desperately need to see, is proof that simple faith, planted in the soil of pain, can rebuild an entire home, guaranteeing a yes of love where there was only bargain and rejection. This is not just my story. It is your potential deliverance. If you have felt the weight of tyranny or believe in the power of a sacred vow, subscribe now and use the flame emoji in the comments. Turn on notifications. I will show you the miracle of reconstruction. Estelle, strong voice looking at the camera. I am Estelle, and I am going to tell you what happens when a man looks at your daughter and sees only land to be negotiated. Soft piano music returns. The tone becomes intimate and serious. Have you ever thought that the greatest battles of faith are not against the devil, but against the tyranny inside your own home? My life and the lives of my daughters were a nightmare in the isolated plantations of Lowcountry, South Carolina. My life should have been one of fullness, but it was marked by violence, rejection, and a poverty that clung to the soul. I watched my husband, Jerome, turn our house into a prison. He saw my daughters, Ruth and Celeste, as bargaining chips in forced marriage negotiations. But fear turned into fury on the darkest night. The trauma of losing one daughter and the threat of having Ruth sold into an arranged marriage ignited a flame. I made a secret vow that would change the course of my lineage. This is not an ordinary tragedy. It is a map of survival, of how the faith of a Black mother broke a generational curse. Do not skip this video. The key to deliverance lies in the details of my escape. Subscribe now and use the flame emoji in the comments if you believe. A mother's faith can break tyranny. My daughters and I were consumed by Jerome's silent tyranny. I married him believing in the dream, but to him, my daughters and I were property. When my youngest, Celeste, was born sickly, Jerome showed me his heart of stone. He refused to touch her and said, "I don't feed problems." Right then, I knew. Love was weakness in our home. The pain grew with poverty. I scrubbed, sewed, fought. But Jerome spent everything on drink, returning with heavy fists of rage. Ruth learned to be invisible, to shrink to survive. But Jerome's cruelest plan was coming. He began speaking of Ruth as a transaction, a coin to be traded for land in a marriage with the wealthy Sanders family. I screamed, "She is just a girl," but Jerome replied, "She is what I say she is." In that moment, I knew my silence was killing me, but I was paralyzed by fear. I spent weeks fighting for Celeste's life, praying, begging. But Ruth's wedding was approaching. The crisis peaked when Ruth tried to run away but was dragged back. Jerome decreed, "In 2 weeks, she will be his wife. Enough foolishness." The wedding dress became our shroud. Then came the darkest night. Celeste's fever dropped, and I felt hope. But she was too light. She had passed away. Jerome cold said, "At least that's one less mouth to feed." In that instant, the pain gave me an unrelenting fury. I took a shovel and buried Celeste alone, with my bare hands, in the cold dirt behind the house. While covering the small body, I made a solemn vow. No other child of mine will be buried alive, in an unchosen marriage, or in a house built on tyranny. Grief gave me the courage to fight for Ruth's freedom. My vow became my fuel. On the night before Ruth's forced wedding, the opportunity came. Jerome was passed out. I grabbed Ruth's hand and we moved like shadows. I could not fail. We took only a few clothes and my Grandma May's worn Bible. I knew the fear of being hunted by Jerome was real, but my faith was stronger. We ran toward Dr. Henry's house. When I knocked, my heart was pounding in my throat. He opened the door and without asking questions said, "Come in. Here, you are safe." I felt the chains fall. Ruth slept without fear for the first time in years. The social judgment pursued us, calling me rebellious and a foolish woman, but I didn't care. I had carried too many losses. The escape was not shame. It was my first act of victory and the breaking of tyranny. In our new life, we fought poverty with dignity. Ruth and I side by side. It was on this path that Joseph, an honest carpenter, appeared. He never saw Ruth or me as property. He saw us as souls. When he asked for Ruth's hand, I said, "You decide, only if your heart says yes." Ruth's yes was the outcome of my freedom. Their marriage, built on love and choice, rebuilt everything that tyranny had destroyed. Years later, watching my grandchildren, I wrote, "The escape, the grief, the persecution, but also the faith, the deliverance, and the victory." I discovered that it is not our strength that sustains us, but God's grace. The enemy tried to bury my lineage, but the only thing he did was plant a seed of strength. This story is a warning to every one of us. Never accept tyranny as your destiny. My vow showed you there is a way out. Share this video so that other Black American mothers and women know their strength is not negotiable. If you haven't subscribed yet, click now. Your story of deliverance begins today.